Welcome to the Be the Light Crown Edition podcast. I'm Hannah Frey, your host and pageant queen extraordinaire. Fun fact, while most people are resistant to change, I'm excited by it. So this podcast is designed to allow me to be the light for others. By sharing my experiences across countless topics where I demolished my fears, prejudice, expectations, and rebuilt brick by brick. My hope is I can encourage you to seek knowledge, implement change, and above all, trust in God. So let's get to it. It's time for some you time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Be the Light Crown Edition podcast. While we're recording this, it is actually Maternal Mental Health Awareness Week, and so while I did an Instagram live on this topic, and hopefully you've already listened to it or tuned in live, I thought what a great opportunity to also do a podcast on this topic so I can dive a little bit deeper. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Essentially, the topic of postpartum anxiety and depression and overall support and health and wellness for post-baby. So I'm ready to dive in. I hope you are as well. As always, I want to preface this with I am not a healthcare provider, and so if at any point you are looking for specific resources from a licensed physician or practitioner, I will link those resources in the show notes and certainly hope that you will check those out. Okay, let's dive in. I want to start, as I usually do, with a little bit about my history and my story, and that's mainly because I know that there is such power and helpfulness in sharing one's own story and experiences with a topic or with a situation. And so while I'm, of course, being very vulnerable, and for some that may be a little uncomfortable, just know that I am really encouraged by sharing my story because I know that having others share their experiences and stories with me just helped tremendously with my journey. So I always like to lay the scene a bit, right? Especially for folks who don't know me. And just to kind of explain where my headspace was at before my first pregnancy. And we are going to focus primarily on my first, but I will also talk a little bit about my second pregnancy as it was much different. However, I was, of course, fairly young, right? So Everett was born in 2019. He will be 4 in just a little bit, which is crazy to think. Very much a type A individual. So if you were just to look up type A in the dictionary, good chance my name is written right there. And I know I've talked about a little bit of the why behind that before, so I won't go into detail, but very much a perfectionist. Okay, if I'm given a project or an assignment, I own that project to completion, I excel on that project, and I also expect a gold star at the end. You can imagine having kids fills none of those needs. So a little bit of a wake-up call. I also didn't have many friends, just really one best friend that had kids of their own, and that is a long-distance best friend. And so I didn't spend time with her children. I didn't spend time with friends who had young ones, and that is really helpful, more than I ever thought possible. My experience and overall awareness of babies to toddlers was just what I had seen on TV. You can imagine how that set me up for failure, right? Or, what I had seen on social media. I also didn't have family close by. And even if I did, I'm not I wouldn't call myself a big family person. Not that I don't enjoy the family that I have, but I don't have a big family. And the family that I do have is very similar to me, and that they're very much, I had to deal with this, so you're going to go through it too. You can do anything on your own, and not so much great at anticipating others' needs or anticipating how we can support others. Okay. Additionally, I'm just a very stubborn person overall, and so I wasn't, even for those few folks who I can't recall, right? A lot of it is a blur, but those folks who may have reached out and may have attempted to offer advice, likely I wasn't in a place to take it because I was so committed to this is my project, this is my problem. And I also firmly believe that just because something worked for somebody else, 20 years ago doesn't make it relevant now. And so that's why I had such a hard time accepting the little bit of help and advice that I was given. Okay. Sorry, I have something in my eye and I don't know why. Okay. better. Okay, moving on. So that's a little bit of my history. This was very much the beginning of the era of like Pinterest perfect, right? Where everything that generally I was seeing on social media was perfection. We didn't quite have that niche of influencers who were being raw and real and authentic and showing like actually how hard things are. No. All I ever saw was the moms with the perfectly curated home and, were homeschooling and their kids were always so well behaved and in matching outfits and babies ate and slept through the night and never cried, and that was the extent of it. True story, I genuinely thought that any baby that you gave a binky to would just stop crying. Actually, like I genuinely thought like, oh, if babies are crying, no big deal, just give them a binky, like they'll stop. Okay, so that's where we were. All right, that's where my headspace was at, and we can. I won't argue with you that maybe I wasn't in the best place to have kids, but again, like where do people go to get this experience and this enlightenment? If you know, let me know, because I just didn't have that opportunity. Okay, so that was what I was getting from social media, and it very much led me to believe, and I very much fed into believing that I was inadequate, that I was the problem. I didn't just think, Hannah, you're not doing it right. I knew it. I believed it to my core that there was something wrong with me and I was inadequate. And so that very much led to some of the mental health issues that we're going to discuss. Okay. Next, Everett was very sickly, and we haven't had any podcasts yet where I kind of dived into functional medicine and my journey with homeopathy and all that, which stay tuned. However, I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. And so Everett was born immediately acid reflux, super colicky, didn't sleep well, didn't gain weight super well. We had struggles with breastfeeding, right? He had a tongue tie. We come to find out had a dairy allergy. He had recurring ear infections, right? He also went to daycare starting at, 2 months old, 3 months old, and so was pretty much just sick indefinitely. I don't know. He's still, unfortunately, dealing with like chronic eczema as a health condition, so TBD. So that didn't help things, okay? And I also wasn't healthy, and not by like, not talking about like the American standard diet and healthy, because that's where the bar is at, and we really should be setting that much higher. Outside of like what I was eating, which was still like a good amount of processed foods or like foods with additives and harmful toxins, much of which we are just unaware of. And I can't wait to also talk about that in a future podcast. But just the amount of toxin exposures, which again, I just wasn't even aware of. So there's no way I could have avoided them. I also just was consistently being given like poor medical advice. Even at my 6-week checkup, okay, whenever you go in and you fill out that little questionnaire where it's like your feelings, and that is like the only opportunity and checkpoint that you get for, hey, is this person like okay, or do they have any mental health issues? I scored high, but apparently not high enough to be given a postpartum anxiety or postpartum depression diagnosis. So, and we'll go into stats later, but when I hear statistics around 1 in 5 women are diagnosed with a mental health disorder, a maternal mental health disorder, I know it's higher than that because I struggled so deeply, and I'm not included in that statistic. I was not given a diagnosis. There were questions on there that say like, do you cry every day? And I'm like, yeah, I cry every day. But apparently, since I wasn't suicidal, I was fine. So just be aware of that as well. While I think it's great that there's a starting point for having a check-in, we're taking our newborns to the doctor's visit like every month, and it should be the exact same for the mother, okay? Hands down. So hopefully we can advocate for reform on maternal health and follow-up, because it's certainly insufficient. I also immediately got an IUD at my 6-week checkup, which that injection of hormones, really birth control in general, is a lot more serious than any physician for the most part is sharing. And I'm not just talking about like blood clotting, but like the long-term implications on like your gut health and your mental health. So just be aware of that, okay? All right, so now you've got a little bit of my history. What that kind of manifested into is that I cried every day, okay? I was miserable day in and day out. I just tried really hard to like set goals for myself because that's how my brain works. It's like, okay, well, he's supposed to be doing this at this point, or the physician told me that he needs to be eating this amount of time, or I took this sleep course and they're supposed to be napping at minimum this amount of time. And when I didn't meet those goals, I just completely spiraled into those feelings of inadequacy. And Skylar was working like 12 to 14 hours. So not to say that I had a technical supportive partner in the home, but they weren't present a lot. And even then, let's give him a little bit of a break. It was his first baby too, right? Like he had no more knowledge or indication that I did. I was also being fed information that, well, you'll recognize your baby's cries and, oh, mother's intuition. Y'all, that didn't happen for me. My baby had one cry because, again, in retrospect, he was in pain. And it was always just a painful cry. I was able to recognize different cries with Kellen, and so I know for a fact that I had the ability, but it was just being told that like I should be able to recognize that. Again, it was like, you're just not good enough, like you didn't do it right. I definitely had a lot of guilt, okay, because I couldn't wait to put him in daycare, and I hated myself for that. And so I just want to like say, if you have those feelings as well of like, I can't wait for a break or I can't wait to get away from my baby, there's nothing wrong with you. That is completely normal. It is a very difficult thing. And that's not to say when my kids went to daycare, or especially at like an early age, I think he started going 1 to 2 days a week between like weeks 8 and 12 just to get used to it. I would go and do something to like fill my cup. I'd go to TJ Maxx or go get a coffee, and I would just sob because I was sad that I was happy that I was getting a break. Okay. So I very much felt regret, guilt, anger, resentment that there were folks who I observed on social media or in person who seemed like their baby never cried, never had health issues. Okay. Was resentful of that. I felt a deep despair, sadness, hopelessness. And when Skylar would come home after working those long shifts, I would pass the baby off to him and I would go sit on the back deck and I would just sob. And it was like that for months and months. And I see the posts that I made because of like the memories that pop up on Facebook and Instagram. And it was so clear that they were all cries for help, that I would just be lamenting and going on and on about difficulties with my experience or with my child. And not to put blame on anyone, but nobody like reached out and was like, are you okay? Or like, how can I help? And so, that's just, it's really unfortunate because it was so clear through my interactions and my language and what I was posting about that I was not okay. And there were some folks who would be like, oh, if you ever need anything, let me know. If those words ever escape your mouth, I want you to walk it back. And I want you to think about how generalized that feel and how unhelpful. And I don't mean to point fingers. I have been the person who has said that. I have been the person who has received that. And I really think that we should challenge ourselves to be more specific. Okay. So for that reason, I want to kind of move into, now that I've shared a little bit about how I felt. So to backtrack a bit with Kellen. Okay, so I'd had all these horrible experiences, did eventually kind of come through it. If you're curious about that transition to being in Mississippi, I would go back and listen to the Drastic Times Call for Drastic Measures podcast because it really talks about it more in detail. I did have a much better experience with Kellen because I put some of these things in place that I'm going to talk about. But it was similar in that the hormones were still impacting me, and I still had moments of, I remember a weekend after bringing home Kellen. For me, it was a specific time of the day. And so right around the end of the day, 2, 3 o'clock, I would just completely bottom out and it was very depressed just for like an hour or two. It was really weird. I would cry and regret having a second child. I did. I would, just was unable to envision what a future would look like with kids who weren't newborns. I just felt very much stuck, very much regretted the decision. I also experienced, after weaning from breastfeeding, which by the way, they don't tell you about this often, I experienced severe hormone shifts once I quit breastfeeding and experienced postpartum rage. And that was the first time that I had experienced that particular aspect of a maternal mental health issue. And that was definitely some of the worst like weeks of my life. And I recognize I experienced with Everett, but I didn't have a name for it until I had Kellen a few years later. And I would actually completely black out and not remember being so angry. And fortunately, I never harmed my children, but I definitely could see how, for folks who have even less support, who have even less education, less sleep, less whatever, how if they were to experience the similar emotions that I did, how we end up with those horrible situations where folks do end up harming their children. And guys, I'm a normal, level-headed, like genuine, caring individual. I love my kids. If you know anything about me, I advocate and I love my children. And even I was capable of having thoughts about wanting to not harm my children, but to like grab them and shake them or like scream in their face, okay? And I was not in control of myself. I luckily that was usually happening whenever Skylar was home and I was able to like lock myself in a closet and like away from everyone as to like not scare the kids or anything. And it was a very short time frame that was happening. It was about 1 to 2 weeks for me after I was weaning from breastfeeding. But y'all, it is real. It can happen to anyone, and it's also okay. And it's also normal. However, there is an onus of, getting the help that you need and getting educated, which is what my goal is of this podcast. So I hope that's helpful in terms of sharing my experience. Okay, so kind of moving into some statistics, because I think that's really helpful and important to highlight. Okay, so 1 in 7 will experience depression during their pregnancy. So this is specific to folks who are actively pregnant. 1 in 7 women will experience depression during pregnancy. Okay, which isn't something I experienced. All of my issues were definitely postpartum. Maternal mental health disorders are the number 1 complication of childbearing. Number 1. Yet we still have a negative stigma around it, and we still think that it's something that women and mothers can completely control without any support or help. Okay. Next, 1 in 5 suffer from a disorder, maternal mental health disorder, like postpartum anxiety, depression, rage, what have you. And again, like I mentioned before, I'm very confident that's a higher number because I'm not included in that statistic. And I feel like very much should have been, very much wish that, not saying that I wanted to be medicated, but I definitely feel like there were more things that I could have done in terms of support, in terms of a counselor, in terms of health, which I'll discuss here in a moment to help that. So now that we've talked through some statistics, I'm really struggling with that word today. I'm not really sure why. I do want to kind of talk through, before we move into like find the light and be the light, I want to share some helpful things for folks who aren't a parent, okay? Because I recognize that you kind of understand where I'm coming from if you've already been a parent and gone through this. But if you're not a parent, maybe you don't intend to be, or maybe you're of the opposite sex and you're like, okay, this is really scary and I'm really sorry this happened to you, but how can I help? That's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, so as a non-parent, or if you're not actively in this situation, how can you help? As I alluded to earlier, the number 1 thing that I would really encourage each of you to take home, if you remember nothing from this podcast, please remember this. Offer specific help consistently. Okay, so what do I mean by that? I mean not, hey, once the baby comes, if you need anything, let me know. No. I have a great friend here. Her name's Amelia. She's here in Mississippi, and she barely knew me when I had Kellen. She's an absolute angel on earth. Godsend. Really, really appreciate her friendship. And something that she said is like, during the day, on these days, Tuesdays and Thursdays, my kids are at PDO, and I don't have any of the kids with me. If you want me to come over and spend like an hour with you, I'll bring you Chick-fil-A. I will hold the baby while you go shower. Let me know. It was specific, and she didn't offer it just one time. Like, she consistently was like, hey, as a reminder, I know I wasn't able to come over last week. If you want me to come over this week, let me know. It honestly is going to bring like tears to my eyes because it meant so much to have someone, even though it's such a small, I don't think it's a small act, but it seems so simple, but it meant so much to me. And because it was specific and because I was like the first time, I'm like, I didn't take her up on it. I'm like, she doesn't really mean that, right? No, she meant it and she genuinely wanted me to take advantage of that. So I just think that's beautiful. Something that I've started to do is I have a great friend, Tess, who's in St. Louis. So it is a bit away from me. And she's pregnant. Granted, she has a great support system. You know, both sides of her family live near her and she has great relationships with her family. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to reach out. And so something I had told her is like, hey, I struggled with XYZ. Something that I would have loved would have been a friend to offer to come for like a weekend or an extended, even a week, an extended stay, which I came for a week when my best friend Jenny in Chicago had her baby. So if you can do that, if I was on maternity leave as well, we had babies literally like 6 days apart. So it worked out perfectly. If it's something that you can offer, then be specific. Hey, I know you're having your baby in X month. I would love to come for a weekend or an extended weekend anytime while you're on maternity leave. I will leave it up to you to schedule. I will reach back out and remind you of this offer later on. I just want you to know that I love you and support you and I want to help. And I know that's something that her response was, she was really appreciative of that. You know, she said, I don't know where my headspace is going to be, if that's something that I'll need to take you up on, but like, it means the world to me that you would offer. So, but the consistency part is important. So I will reach out once more, once the baby's here and offer that again. So yeah, that's really important. I would also encourage you to, if it can't be a visit, some other ways that you can show up in this way would be to send encouraging scripture, gifts, texts, video messages, voicemails. DoorDash, it's like so easy to send someone a coffee these days. I definitely have a great friend, Sam, who again, I just am so thankful for her friendship, having been here just a few years. There were times where I was having hard days and my kids were homesick and she would just DoorDash me a coffee, or I think she sent me food one time too. I can't remember. But it just speaks volumes to one's character, especially if you can't show up in other ways. You can find a way to make someone feel special and important. I would also like encourage you, if like I have seen friends who are currently pregnant or have recently had a child who are struggling with a particular issue, and that one can be a bit tricky in terms of offering your advice, because I can recall folks trying to give me advice and I just wanted nothing to do with it. I think the approach is really important. I think coming from like a humbling perspective of, hey, like kind of sandwiching in between, like, hey, like, wow, this is so great. Like, look how beautiful she is. I'm so glad that you're doing well. Hey, I noticed this one thing. It's definitely nothing. And like, who am I to give advice? However, because I love you, it's important to me that I share, this resource or this thought. And hopefully they will receive that well. Because if your intention is coming from a good place and your intention isn't coming from, oh, I want to shame them for doing XYZ wrong or what have you, then you're likely it's going to be well received. The caveat to that is, do not offer advice or comment on something that they cannot change. Okay? And I don't mean like if the car seat's wrong, like whatever, but I just mean if something has already happened, they had a medical procedure or whatever, it's not going to do any good at this point unless your advice can be used for subsequent, visits or whatever. So just keep that in mind. That would not be considered helpful. Okay, so offer specific help consistently. And I gave you some great examples. Also, always include that individual, that mother, that new mom, even if you know they can't come. Okay, I've got a friend who moved to St. Louis, met her here, and I hosted like a girls' night, and I knew that she's like kind of struggled with, making new friends or kind of finding her niche in a new town, because she's from here, I get it. And I had this girls' night planned. I still shot her an invite on Facebook, and she was like, oh my gosh, I wish I could come. Like, I know you can't come. I just wanted you to know that I was thinking about you, and this is something I would love to do with you if we can in the future. And I know how that would make me feel. I know that feeling included, even if I consistently have to say no, in that season of life. Okay, it's a little bit different than someone who has like grown kids and they're just like constantly blowing off your invites. Not what we're talking about. I'm talking about a new mom who has like good reason to not be able to come to things and support you in whatever way. Just show that you support her by continuing to invite them, even if you know they can't come. Okay? All right, so now that we've gone through that, I want to go through the be the light and the find the light, and we will switch that. Find the light, be the light, and then we'll wrap up for the next episode. Okay. As a reminder, find the light is intended to, this section in general is intended to meet folks where they're at. And finding the light is more for folks who really just need to start small, bite-size bits, and move from there. So the first thing I would say is whether you're pregnant now, have a new baby, or plan to have another baby, this is applicable for you. List out your support system for, like, I guess both during and, but primarily post-baby. And I say that because I think if I had done this, I would have realized that there were more folks I probably could have leaned on than I did. I wasn't as vocal with my needs because I'm also like a people pleaser and I don't like asking people for favors, but this is that opportunity where like that's okay to do. So I would just start with like visualizing, okay, realistically, who are the people in my life who could be a support system? Whether that's like a one-time, someone who you know, like you could rely on if you needed to go to an appointment alone and could watch your kid for an hour, whether that's someone that you could count on, like how my mother came with both new babies and spent like a week to 2 weeks and was willing to do that. So just list that out. Next, I want you to list out your concerns about childbirth on. And what I mean concerns, I mean like list out what are you most worried about when it comes to yourself, your routine, and your child. So for me, I was most worried about being a working mom with a child and having enough time. Okay, because at the time when I had an 1 hour and 15 minute commute one way. And it ended up being a really big issue. So wish I would have gone through this exercise. I would try to think proactively about your biggest concerns about childbirth on. That way, once you kind of name the beast, once you kind of verbalize your darkest fears, even if they're not like super severe, even if they're like mildly just an inconvenience, you take away the power from that. Because then, as we're moving into point 3, you'll have that ability to brainstorm solutions and resources for each of those, or even bottom line, just articulating, okay, that is what I'm most afraid or like worried about. And like, here's best case and worst case scenario. We've gone through that exercise several times on the podcast. It allows you the opportunity to take ownership over your fear and also gives you a great prayer list, right? Like prayer requests. Lord, these are the things on my heart, and you can pray through them. So hopefully that's helpful. We're now going to move into be the light. So as a reminder, more for folks who have like maybe already had one kid and are looking to have more, or have just have a little bit more knowledge about children or about the experience and just feel like they're in a better place, then this will be helpful for you. Okay, so first I would say prioritize your health as early as possible. It takes time, okay, to heal. And when I say prioritize your health, I don't mean like, ooh, you have to have like a 6-pack abs. No, what I mean is like, are your hormones in line? Like, have you given your body a chance to regulate after coming off birth control if that was something that you were on? Are you supporting your adrenals? Are you supporting, your body's overall wellness? Is your toxin exposure low? Do you, eat healthy, or do you eat a lot of preservatives and additives that are harmful in your foods? Those things take time to balance the scales for, and so you can't get as much done while pregnant. It's already very taxing on your body, and I'm telling you, I promise you, I went through this. If you're not in a great spot and then you get pregnant, your body will find ways to adapt and like overcompensate, some of which in my firm belief is like taxing the adrenals of your unborn child, which I firmly believe is something that happened to me. Happy to talk about that offline if you're like, what are you talking about? However, and then after the baby was born, I was just a total wreck when it came to health. And that's why my hormones were all over the place. That's why I firmly believe I had postpartum anxiety and depression and the postpartum rage. And those were things that I truly feel like if I had addressed 2 years before, I wouldn't have had as much of an issue. So if you're in a spot to do that, I would highly consider prioritizing your health. Next, I would document your partner expectations. I think that marriage counseling is a part of most folks' life, but I don't know how detailed before marriage, and I don't know how detailed it goes into, okay, but when you have a child, who's going to change all the diapers, right? Like who's going to take off for doctor's appointments? And I think that you should sit down and have a conversation with your spouse about what are your expectations based off of, the situation that you're in. Maybe someone's a stay-at-home parent, maybe someone works full-time. Maybe you both work full-time, like in our situation, and have those conversations early on so there aren't any surprises when the baby's here and emotions are high and things are already kind of hard. It also would allow you to make the necessary changes in your life if necessary to accommodate for those expectations that you want. Okay, lastly, create a daily routine for maternity leave, or even like from baby on. Maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, so you're like, my mat leave is indefinitely. And I will create a resource here and link it in the show notes. It'll also be on my website. So if you want to utilize my resource, please do. I would love for you to do so. This is something that really helped my mental health. And when I realized that, as I had mentioned, like between 2 and 3 is when I'm assuming my hormones would dip and I was just like completely and utterly felt like hopeless. It would help to eat a snack, okay? Something with a little bit of sugar in it, like natural sugar, protein, anything to just like give my body some substance. And I would go outside. It didn't matter if it was raining, hot, cold. I had to get outside, even if it was just a short trip to the mailbox to get the mail. It really counteracted that dip and was so helpful. I also found value in running errands or getting out of the house once a day. And I recognize if you have like 5 kids, you're like, that's just not reasonable. And I hear you. So maybe for you it's like a project, or maybe it's, just one thing that you want to accomplish for that day, because I definitely don't want you to overwhelm yourself and have like this huge massive to-do list. But that's what I would say. So hopefully that's helpful. We're going to go ahead and close in prayer and move on to the next episode. Dear God, thank you again for this opportunity, for this platform to share my experiences with maternal mental health, especially with the Awareness Week going on as the week that we're recording this. I pray that for each mother and potential mother who is listening to this, that they are able to take the information and advice given and really internalize how they can optimize their experience, God. And while knowing that, of course, childbearing is intentionally painful as a result of Adam and Eve's sin, we just thank you ultimately for your overall grace and for all of the blessings that we don't deserve as a result of our sin, like just similar to the joys that come with motherhood. And I pray that you watch over each and every mother as they walk through their experience in motherhood, and that they ultimately thank you, God, for that experience, and will continue to look for you for guidance and next steps. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.